Hello, everyone, and welcome to another 30 for 30. That's right, we are doing 30 episodes of Springsteen's in November. 30 episodes, 30 days, 30 discussions of Bruce Springsteen albums. And today is a timey-wimey episode. It is my morning, my guest afternoon. Marcos, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jesse.
And where are we talking to you from?
Right now, I'm right on the outskirts of Geneva, Switzerland, but I'm all over the place in Europe. I was born in Spain, I was raised here in Switzerland, and now I'm living in the Netherlands. I'm doing a master's degree over there and all over the place, always traveling around. This is actually the first weekend that I'm in Switzerland with my parents since end of August, beginning of September. So, yeah, a lot of traveling.
Tell us a little about yourself.
I've always lived this double life because I grew up listening to a lot of music at home. The greats, obviously Springsteen, but a lot of influences in there. U2, Elvis, a little bit of Bob Dylan. More recently, I've started getting more recently, maybe 7 or 8 years already, Chris Stapleton, Sam Fender as well. But at the same time, I've also led a more professional life with regards to my study. So I'm an aerospace engineer, and I'm now doing a master's in control and simulation in the Netherlands. Currently doing some work for a defense contractor here in Switzerland. It's engineer by day, musician by night, the kind of thing.
That I've already told Marcos that I need him to have on as a rare episode because I we could spend a whole hour talking about.
Yeah.
I had a guy apply for a job where I was hiring a customer service rep, and he had just graduated from college and he had a degree in mathematics and a minor in music. And
Hmm.
I was curious where the connection was because I was waiting for him to talk about the mathematics, science of math, and all that. And he was like, "No, I just had a bunch of music credits." So there wasn't a
Oh.
great story. But I imagine there is a story about being an engineer and a musician, the kind of the seeing structure.
Yeah, it's funny because I had my high school education, my middle school education, but then once I would finish school, I would go in the evenings to a music school
Mhm.
where I started out just basic music theory, then moved on to saxophone. And then the guitar and the singing is a little apart from all that, but I've had some formal musical training. When you're a kid, you don't really see relationships between all these things. You go to school, then you go to music school, do your own thing. As I've grown older and because of that music theory education that I got, it's opened my eyes in a way that music is very mathematical. And there's a lot of structure within the rhythm with the own shaping of the notes, chord progressions, and everything. And I don't know, it's just something that is interesting to me because I can always compare both worlds and find that common ground. Whereas other people like my dad, who've also studied music, but he does business and he works more in the banking industry. They can't really find that common ground. So that's something that I'm very grateful for my parents to have been able to give me both a musical education and a more professional mathematical education.
All right, so tell us what albums you want to talk about.
Yes, so I have two albums today. They're both in my top five, not only top five Springsteen albums, but basically top five albums of all time. One of them is Nebraska, which a lot of people will understand why it's a top five of mine. The other one is Western Stars, which I know has a little bit of a more controversial opinion within the Springsteen world, but I think it's an absolutely tremendous album, which I'm super excited to be talking about.
So I shared with you right before we hit record that when I started spending time with Western Stars, I felt like it was a collection of short stories by someone like Elmer Leonard or
Hmm.
somebody. And then when I went back and revisited Nebraska, I felt like it was a collection of short stories. In a lot of ways, I think Western Stars is very much in that vein of telling stories about people's lives. And if Nebraska is the Midwest, Western Stars is the West, California,
Hmm. Yeah.
Arizona, all this stuff. Am I crazy or do you see a little bit there, Marcos?
I never thought of it that way. When you mentioned that Nebraska, Western Stars was closer to Nebraska than Tom Joad was to Nebraska, at first I was a little taken aback.
Yeah.
But now that you mentioned the reason, really the short story aspect of it, I can really see where you're coming from. Nebraska, at the end of the day, is indeed a collection of short stories that, in the big picture, they make sense. But when you try to compare something like um, Nebraska itself to
Yeah.
State Trooper or My Father's House, while the themes of despair, the darkness of the songs are there, they're not really coherent together in the way you
Right.
have Nebraska talking about the killing spree of Charles Starkweather and Carolina Fugate, and State Trooper about a straight trooper, or Open All Night, or My Father's House speaking about his more interpersonal relationship with his dad. There's not really much of a connection in that sense apart from the big theme. Whereas in Western Stars, it is also like that. I think in Western Stars, what really ties the songs together is more the musical style as opposed to the
Yeah.
lyrics and the themes of the songs. It is a collection of short stories, hitchhiking about a trucker going on the road and just talking about everything that he's observing around, or Sleepy Joe's Cafe about the story of really living that kind of dive bar feeling to something like Moonlight Motel, which is, to me, it's one of my probably top three Springsteen songs, just the way it's written, everything. But again, there's not much of a connection. And it's funny because it also happens in Nebraska, lyrically speaking.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really cool that you pointed that out because you're not crazy
Oh, thank you. I
in
appreciate
that
that.
sense. Now, whether I don't know if I would go as far as saying that Nebraska Western Stars is closer to Nebraska than Tom Joad Devils and Dust, because it is, while it is a solo album, it's not really a solo album in the same sense than
Right.
Nebraska or Tom Joad.
Yeah.
You can have the B3 organ on Jesus Was an Only Son, whereas, really the Ghost of Tom Joad and Nebraska are, strictly speaking, guitar, harmonica, and vocals. Western Stars, with the use of that orchestration, occasional drums in there, I don't know if it would be closer to Nebraska than Tom Joad is, but certainly in lyrically speaking, it could or the way the album is tied together, it could very well be.
So I'm gonna get some questions, and I want to hear why you picked these and give you stories. But I'll ask you this. I think both of them are releases that surprised people. Like
Mhm.
they did not see Nebraska coming after the river, and they certainly didn't when Western Stars was going to be announced. What are your thoughts on that?
I can't really say, Matt, much firsthand for Nebraska since it was
Right.
released 18 years before I was born.
Yes.
But the funny thing about Nebraska, and this is why the album means so much to me. When my dad was 16 years old, my uncle brought to their house the first Springsteen record that kind of hit our
Okay.
household. And I was born in the USA. So my dad listened to Born in the USA. My dad, he grew up in the outskirts of Madrid in Spain. When Born in the USA came out, being such a lively album, he instantly fell in love with it. And about a year later, he went out to a record store to look for another Springsteen release to buy.
Yeah.
In his hand, he held Nebraska in one and The River in the other. Now, this was
Yeah.
a time when you couldn't just hop online,
Right.
or CDs weren't really even around yet. You just had to buy the album completely based off the cover. And so, holding The River and holding Nebraska, my dad was way more drawn to Nebraska. So he bought Nebraska, came home, put it in the vinyl in the turntable, and you could imagine the shock when, after listening for about a year to Born in the USA on repeat, you get
Yes.
the haunting, eerie harmonica that opens up the album. And then the rest of the album kind of follows that theme, but stays strictly acoustics. I asked my dad about this earlier before we hopped on the call. I was like, what did you think of the album when you first bought it? And he said, I was super surprised. I can't tell you if I was surprised in a good or a bad way, but I forced myself through the first listens since I had spent money on the album. You're a
Sure.
teenager, you don't have that much money going around. Whatever you have, you spend it on music. So he forced himself to listen to the album on a couple of repeats and gradually became really fond of it. It became like an attachment to him. And it's become one of his all-time favorite albums. I actually still have the original vinyl that he bought with the receipt because the receipts, back in the day were printed on paper that wouldn't
Sure.
fade. So
Right.
I still have the receipt of when he bought that album. But like you said, it's something, even my dad having bought it after Born in the USA, it's still something that you really do not expect, a direction that you really wouldn't have seen Springsteen take. But I think in a way it was something that was necessary for his career because it truly showed the singer-songwriter within him. And with regards to Western Stars, I had, when it came out, I had been living in the Netherlands for about 6 months. And apart from the Ties That Bind that came out in late 2015 or early 2016,
Yeah.
and High Hopes that came out in 2014, which is more of a compilation rather than an
Right.
album. The last real Springsteen release for me was Wrecking Ball. I was only 12 years old when that came out. Memories are I don't really have any memories of going out to buy it. I just know that just one
Yeah.
day it showed up and I started listening to it, and you end up
Yeah.
learning all the songs. So Western Stars was really the first Springsteen album that I bought with my own money that I can vividly remember going out to buy. When the single came out in April, Hello Sunshine, I remember being with my girlfriend and just like popping on my headphones and listening to it. And I was surprised, that same
Yeah.
feeling that my dad had when he listened to Nebraska. I can't tell you if it was a good surprise. It was just really not something that I was expecting.
Yeah.
And the song itself, apart from a couple of lines, is not lyrically very deep, especially compared to the rest of the album. Later on, when the next single came out, which is There Goes My Miracle. That one, again, I had that same feeling with the lyrics. It could have been slightly, or Bruce is such an amazing songwriter, and we're
Yeah.
used to such an insane level and quality of output that as soon as it drops a hair below the average,
Yeah.
we're already saying, oh, this is good. This isn't Springsteen standard, whatever. Now, in the song itself, I've grown insanely fond of the song, but I remember that when I first listened to it, I was taken aback a little bit, especially by the lyrics. So I was curious to see how the rest of the album would develop. Also knowing that I am a fan of the album cuts, so not necessarily the
Right.
singles. And that's something, I guess it happens to a lot of like us hardcore Springsteen
Yeah.
fans. We tend to prefer the album cuts rather than the singles. So when the album came out, I remember being awake that night waiting for it to hit midnight so that I could go on Spotify and play it right
Right.
away. And I just lied in bed, put on my headphones, close my eyes, and listen to the entire album from start to finish. What I do remember was that I, I wasn't too surprised with it up until the very last song of the album, which is Moonlight Motel, which, as I said, is one of my favorite songs.
Yeah.
I went to bed, woke up the next morning, and did the same thing. I put on my headphones, closed my eyes, listened to the album again. And I think during that second listen, I don't know if I was just tired the night before or whatever, but I listened to it in a slightly different way. And I started to notice things that I hadn't noticed the first time that I listened to the album. And immediately after that second listen, showered, got out the
Yeah.
house, went to a CD store, bought a CD, and then went to the record store and bought the vinyl. And I have a picture I remember that my girlfriend took of me with like super proud of the
Yeah, I got
vinyl and the
both. Yeah.
CD. And those are like the first Springsteen album that I bought with my own money and the
Yeah.
first Springsteen release that I can vividly remember. And that time being in the Netherlands, only knowing my girlfriend, not knowing many other people there. I was also struggling through my first year of university, moving from student housing to student housing. I
Yeah.
just always had that album on in the background. And now when I listen to it, it just brings me back to those days. Now, they weren't necessarily good days for me, but I have very fond memories of my first university year. The first year that
Yeah.
I lived out the house, I was alone, had that independence that I guess as teenagers were always seeking. And it just brings me back really good memories. And there are some songs on the album which I think are absolute gems. Apart from Moonlight Motel, there's Drive Fast, which I think is an absolutely amazing song. Stones, Somewhere North of Nashville. That's actually, I think that Somewhere North of Nashville with My Best Was Never Good Enough from The Ghost of
Yeah.
Tom Joad are the two shortest Springsteen tracks he's ever released because they're both under 2 minutes. But I, this is exactly what I said before, which is I'm more a fan of the album cuts rather than the singles. And
Sure.
I think Hello Sunshine and There Goes My Miracle, I personally wouldn't have chosen them as singles because I feel like there are significantly stronger songs in the album that could have,
Yeah.
they don't get the attention they deserve precisely because they weren't released as singles. But that is the first memories that I have of Western Stars and why it really means so much to me. And same with
Yeah.
Nebraska. It's just an album that it's always has always been playing around the house constantly. So I've grown up listening to Nebraska, and but being a singer-songwriter myself, having my band all over the world because we all grew up together, but then for university we all went our own ways. I most of the things that I do and the shows that I play are purely acoustic, especially Nebraska really resonates with me because it's that raw artistic singer-songwriter form that I've always tried to emulate myself.
Yeah. I can remember, first off, I grew up, my parents loved Glenn Campbell, and this felt right at home for me. People that I've talked to over the years had the similar thought about you that Hello Sunshine, they weren't quite sure what it
Yeah.
was.
Hmm.
I really liked the idea that you're falling in love with depression. And the idea, because I have seen people that something traumatic happens to them and it becomes their identity. And yeah, but I think that it has, and I actually had a couple people, one, a guest who I just adore, was really disappointed in Western Stars because of its release. She was wanting another Magic. She was wanting
Hmm.
another political album. We were in the
Yeah.
middle of the Trump administration.
Yes.
All the things were going on. She wanted angry Bruce. And instead we get this wonderful thing. You know, I think that when you throw Western Stars and Letter to You as a duo toward quote unquote the end of someone's career,
Hmm.
it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
If you
Hmm.
do think that this is a guy that has already done over 15, 18 studio albums, to have these this late in your career is wow. I still have to use the American analogy, my fastball, right? I can do
Hmm.
that. Yeah, so I remember being thrilled. My experience was in 1977, I discovered Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys
Uh-huh.
way past their career, but I
Yeah.
just discovered them, became obsessed with them, was going and buying 8 tracks and albums and anything I could find. And I remember picking up Pet Sounds
Hmm.
and putting it in the 8 track player, going, what the hell is this? This sounded nothing. I mean, there was no surf. The
Yeah.
harmony was there, but it was like, what is there? And there's songs with there's instrumentals on it, and I
Mm.
was just confused. It now, push comes to shove, I would probably put Pest Sounds as my favorite album. Have you read Warren Zane's Deliver Me from Nowhere book?
Absolutely, I have. Yes, I think it's an amazing book. And actually, after I finished reading it, I gifted it to my dad because of the special connection that he has
Yeah,
with Nebraska. And it was the first book that he read this year. And when I got it back, it was funny because I had highlighted some
yeah,
things that I wanted to emphasize for him. And when I got it back, it was all completely highlighted everywhere because of everything that he would find in there, all the details that he didn't necessarily know about the album.
yeah.
And it's absolutely amazing to read the process of how the album was made. And actually, it's funny because I just in this past August, I released an album myself, and it was my first full length album, but my first release since 2020. 2020 release, funnily enough, was called "From the Town of Lincoln, Nebraska," as a node to Nebraska. But this album was inspired heavily on that book because me being somewhere in the middle of my studies, living alone, we don't necessarily have the means to go out and purchase or rent studio time to record
Right.
music. So after reading really the guts of how the album was made, I started wondering, what if I try to replicate what was done with Nebraska, but with the band?
Oh,
And that's
nice.
exactly what I've done for my latest album. I've everything has been recorded entirely at home, mixed by me and mastered by my guitar player. And in the end, it's been a fairly cheap production.
Yeah.
I'm really happy with the outcome of it. And a lot of the stuff was purely applied from what I learned reading Deliver Me from Nowhere.
And what's the name of the album?
Album is called Antebellum. Antebellum meaning before the war in Latin.
Yeah.
I felt like it was an appropriate title. And a really big shout out to Rob DeMartin, Springsteen's tour photographer, because he was kind enough to do all the album artwork and photography for my album as well. So thanks, Rob.
Yeah, I just pulled up your website and I'm seeing the cover with you and the guitar case and the city in the
Uh-huh.
background. God, that's a
Yeah.
beautiful photo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all Rob's work. It was very spontaneous. I sent him a message to see if he would get a drink or get some lunch, and he said, "I've got a better idea. Let's go around town and shoot some pictures." So that was really kind of him.
Nice. All right, so we've compared the two. So let's start with Nebraska. You've shared already that you tend to go toward more of the deeper cuts, but what
Hmm.
are a couple of songs that Nebraska, and cheating is saying all of them, but are there songs that specifically speak to you?
So the first one is obviously Nebraska.
Yeah,
I think that mainly because when you start the album, it catches you off guard. Like I said before, it starts with this very eerie harmonica, which
yeah,
slowly builds into an acoustic guitar. And what's cool about this specific song is that it's based on a real life event. Now,
yeah,
this song never happened to Bruce because it's the
yeah,
story of Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate going on their killing spree in Wyoming and Nebraska.
right.
So I think it's super interesting how Bruce is really able to step into the shoes of a character whom he has no personal connection with. I think it's super brave, especially because at the end of the day, you don't know who this person was, you don't know the details about their lives, and all you've learned from them, like in his case, if I recall correctly, it was going to a library and
Yeah,
seeing some newspaper articles about the story. So I think it's super interesting to imagine this person's life from your own point of view and fill in the gaps of what you don't know what happened, but in
yeah,
such a way as it still is realistic. Like all the stuff we that may or may not could have happened is realistic enough in the way that Bruce writes so that the listener could say, yes, this story is coherent. It makes sense. And then the flow of the song, just from the start, I saw her standing on her
Yeah.
front lawn, which kind of opens the song. You don't know what the song is about just yet. And it seems like a really maybe cheesy love line to say it in that way.
Yeah.
But the contrast of the song with saying, I hope that she's right there on my lap, basically when I'm about to be executed for the crimes I've committed with you. It's funny because it's a song that you could almost consider a love song in a very um, unconventional way. It's a love song amongst two people who are attracted to themselves through something that is completely unconventional, and that is literally a killing spree.
Yeah.
So that's really something that's why Nebraska, I think, is one of the best written songs of the album. Another one that really stands out to me is Open All Night, especially because it's the only song in the album that is played on electric guitar. But it's played in such a way, or it's recorded in such a way. I can't tell you if it was, plugged in directly to the Tascam recorder, or if it was run through a very clean amplifier and then the amplifier was mic'd up. To me, it
Yeah.
sounds like it was plugged directly into the Tascam, although I guess the only people who would know this would be Mike Batlin and Bruce himself.
Yeah.
The way the guitar is played is it sounds like an acoustic guitar, but at the same time, it doesn't sound like an acoustic guitar. And so it's just something it's if you already don't expect Nebraska being put out by Bruce, within Nebraska, you don't expect Open All Night either. So it's like a twist in
Yeah.
a twist, which I think is cool. And then the lyrics to the song, it's one of the cheesiest songs of the album, to say it that way, lyric
Yeah.
wise. But there are some lines in there which I think are absolutely amazing. I used to have this guitar pick that I had, like a metal guitar pick, and on it I had engraved, "Hey ho, rock and roll, deliver me from nowhere," because I think that's, especially for me as a musician, that's one of the most powerful lines and one of the lines that I relate to the most in Bruce's music.
Yeah.
Those are probably the two songs that stand out to me within the album. Obviously, Atlantic City is an absolutely amazing track. Johnny 99 is an absolutely amazing
Yeah.
track. Although I must say, I prefer the box set Johnny 99 version
Okay.
over the album Johnny 99 version. So, like the one where he plays it live in the 1975-85, I feel like it's way more powerful than the album version. And it is a sad song in a way, Johnny 99,
Yeah.
but the album already has a bunch of fairly dark songs, and maybe this one could have benefited a little bit more, having been pushed to the limits of the acoustic 75-85 version. I'm not a
Yeah.
super fan of the entire live band version. I know like people love it and it's an absolutely a show blaster because it gets the band, the horns, everybody
Yeah.
out singing, clapping. But I feel like it does lose a little bit of what the lyrics really speak about in that version. In that sense, I'm really fond of the acoustic versions.
Are you curious if there is a version, Alaska, Nebraska out there somewhere? Do you want to hear it?
Oh man, this has been like, I think I would have to probably take the day off work or something if
Yeah.
somehow Electric Nebraska ever came out, because
Yeah.
having grown up listening to Nebraska and also listening to the various electric versions of the song that he's played over the
Yeah.
years, it's cool to see the contrast, especially the Atlantic City TV plug version or even the live in New York City
Yeah.
version. Same thing with Johnny 99 and the horns. The Seeger Sessions version of Open All Night, I think, is fantastic. But at the end of the day, they're still live performances, and I really want to see how Bruce would have been able to take the acoustic track and replicate it into a band track. So I've always heard that he wasn't happy with the output, but I'm super curious and I would one day love to get my hands on the electric version just to listen to it. Probably it won't top the
Right.
real Nebraska, to say it that way, but I think it would certainly be like a fun little gimmick to listen to, just see how in the span of months, Nebraska was recorded in early, was it 81 or 82? In January of
Yeah.
81 or 82, I can't remember right now. And then the time that they took to record them in the studio with the band, I would really like to see how the songs in a matter of mere months
Yeah.
evolved from the demo track to the full electric track.
Yeah. So let's move on to Western Stars. You talked about Moonlight Motel. One of my favorite answers. When I asked someone the question, does Mary get in the car? Someone gave the answer, said yes, and Moonlight Motel is they have moved to California, and that is she has died. And the person is
Okay.
mourning Mary. And I said, I don't know if that's the right answer, but that's as close to a perfect answer as you can get, right? I will never
Uh-huh.
listen to Moonlight Motel a different way. Talking about cinema, I think Tucson Train is a made for TV movie all right there. It is the
hmm
idea the guy or gal has screwed up royally, and you could just hear them just give me a weekend. Give me a weekend. Just come out. I'll get you a separate hotel room. There's no pressure. Just that line, I can show her a man can change, has everything to me. But I
hmm
agree. Every song is really strong. So, are there a couple that stand out to you?
Like I said, Moonlight Motel to me is literally the album gold star, to say it that way. It's one of my
Yeah.
top five, probably even top three Bruce songs.
Yeah.
Just the chord structure. If you take a song like Drive Fast, which is like one of my favorite songs in the album as well, the chord structure is a little bit irregular. This
Yeah.
might be, because I love to geek out about whether he's playing an A sus4 as the first chord,
Yeah.
going into the A, then going to the C, D, and then E, which have no conventional musical relationship within them. But
Yeah.
that's what makes the song so beautiful. Whereas
Right.
in Moonlight Motel, it's such a simple, what is it? It's an E flat. So just say it's an E. So it would be E, C sharp minor, A, B. It's a very simple 1, 6, 5, 4 chord structure. And that is the chord structure on which 90% of pop songs have been developed on. But it's that simplicity and that kind of sweet melody that we're all so familiar with that really lets the lyrics stand out on their own. There's a phrase in the song which every time I listen to it gives me goosebumps, which is the pool's filled with empty, 8 foot deep. To me, when a songwriter is able to create an image within your head that becomes as vivid as what you're seeing through your eyes themselves,
Yeah.
that's when you know you've done a perfect job. And really, that song is exactly what it does to me. I can perfectly, when I close my eyes, I can see the pool. I know what the pool looks like. I know the parking lot that he's in at the end, going to take a shot of whiskey. I can just see it all in my head.
You-
And that's the reason why I think Moonlight Motel is such a beautiful song and really the song of the album. There are other songs, Drive Fast, The Stuntman. It's a song that I like a lot, mainly because of its the unconventionality that there is within the chord structure at the very south of Spain, almost at the border
Okay.
with Portugal. And Southern Spanish people are very traditional within their musical way, so they love to listen to flamenco, and they aren't necessarily open to more uh, Western American music, to say it that way.
Okay.
But for fun, I was like, ah, what the hell? Nobody knows whether it's my song or Bruce's song or a Bob Dylan song or whatever.
Right.
I'm going to open up with Drive Fast. So I opened up the show with Drive Fast. And after I got off stage at the end of the night, I had a gentleman approach me and with a very thick Southern Spanish accent, he said, I loved that cover of Springsteen that you did at the very start of the show. And I was like, whoa, how do you know that was Springsteen? And he was like, yeah, that's what was on Western Stars. No,
Oh,
blown away by the fact that he had been able to recognize the song and he knew what album it was from. Also marked something special for that song. And it's one of the songs I like the most from the album.
I love that.
hmm
What were your thoughts on the film?
I hadn't watched the film until
Okay.
about a couple of months ago, so right before summer. And it's funny because I
Okay.
have every single Springsteen release as soon as the film soundtrack, to say it that way, came out.
Yeah.
I also went and bought the CD. I still have a CD player and a cassette player
Sure.
in the
Yeah.
car. So
Sure.
I I have to go out and buy CDs if I want to listen to music in the car. I got the film soundtrack for the car, and I don't know why. I just came to me before summer that I had never watched the movie.
Oh,
So I sat down one night and I watched the movie. I think it's the way it's made is really cool because it intertwines those live band performances in a very, you really get that feeling of like dive bar with the
yeah.
lighting and everything.
Yeah.
And I think it was cool to into those shots of him playing that live with the shots of him being out in the desert with a horse and just doing
Yeah.
some voiceover. In a way, it is similar to the Letter to You movie because the Letter to You movie also is made in that similar style. I want to almost say
Yeah.
that the live version of the album is better than the album itself.
You won't
Um,
be the first person that has told me that.
I think live the studio stuff is amazing, but just Bruce is such a good live performer that every time he plays live, it adds an extra
Yeah.
touch of magic that you can't really replicate on records. And also because if you listen to the beginning of The Wayfarer,
Yeah.
there's chord pattern, so it goes da,
Yeah.
da. On the record, it's played on a synthesizer imitating strings.
Mm.
Live, it's played with pure strings.
Okay.
And the fact that it is real strings playing it, it adds a nuance to it that you can't really replicate on a synthesizer. And so it feels
Yeah.
way more real. It feels way more vivid. And that's why I think the live version of the album is way better. Also, like record is there's two songs on the record. So there's Sundown and I think it's Stones and Sundown. I know it's for a
Yeah.
fact Sundown, but I don't know which the song that comes before it. On the record, it's made so that it does a liaison incident on 57th Street into Rosalita. So they
Yeah.
end on that like tense note, which resolves on the first chord of the next song. But on the live version, he just holds it for a little bit longer
Yeah.
with like the pedal steel holding that note. And that transition is so seamless that it almost feels like it's the same song just being
Yeah.
continued. And I think that's something that he did beautifully on the live version that obviously on the record it's also done, but there's always a cut because it is the end. Like this is a song that's been mastered, and this is another song that's been mixed and mastered this way.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of live recordings, you mix and master it all in one go. And so you're able to seamlessly transition from one song to another.
Yeah.
The only downside to the live version, I would say, is Moonlight Motel. Moonlight Motel is really the only song that I feel is better on the album than on the live version. But it's because it's such a personal song with such lyrical significance that it
Yeah.
really needs to be super intimate in order to catch the essence of the
I can
song.
see that.
And that is what is lost on the
Yeah.
live version.
Marcos, this was so much fun. By the way, uh,
Likewise.
my my wife, we went and saw the film in the theater, and about 10 minutes into it, she reached over and said, "You are so jealous of those people in that barn, aren't you?" I go, "Yes, yes." So, if someone wants to reach you, and first off, any final thoughts?
I think the most personal note I think what really shows how much Nebraska and Western Stars, but mainly Nebraska means to me was like I said earlier on it's also a fun personal story with the EP that I released in 2020. I titled it From the Town of Lincoln, Nebraska. And I was listening to more dark music at that time. So Nebraska, a lot of Towns Van Zandt, Colter Wall. And when you run out of inspirations to write music, a fun little exercise that I like to do is take songs and turn them on their backs. And so for Nebraska, because it's written from the perspective of Charles Starkweather, I said to myself, wouldn't it be fun if we somehow learned about the perspective of Carol Ann Fugate.
Right.
Um, so I took literally the song Nebraska. It starts on an A chord, goes to a D chord, and it just alternates in that with a G chord added somewhere in there. So what I did is I inversed it. And so I
Okay.
started on the D chord and then went to the A chord and rewrote the lyrics in such a way that it talks about the experiences of the killing spree, but from the point of view of Carol Ann Fugate, who at the end
Hmm.
of the day, we never really know whether she was actively involved, whether she wanted to do that, whether she was coerced into
Yeah.
going to the killing spree. And from then on, like after writing that song, uh, the rest of the songs of the album followed directly. I have to thank Bruce and thank the Nebraska record for being able to directly inspire one of my
Nice.
records.
All right. If someone wants to hear that and some of your other music and reach out to you, what's the best way?
Instagram, Facebook, my website, marcoscabanas.com. I'm pretty much everywhere on social media, so fairly easy to reach out to me.
All right. All right.
Yes,
And you know what we should do if you guys are willing? Let's get the three of you, like in January, to talk about your February gig
that'd be
and promote it.
amazing.
Right.
Cool.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me, Jesse.
No problem. Hang tight. Guys, I don't know. There's been a lot of discussion about Nebraska since Warren's book, so I probably don't need to remind you to go back. But on each of these episodes, I've been talking about clear your mind, forget the history for a minute, open your heart, and listen to those albums, fresh perspective. Think about someone had bought the river and they rush out to get Nebraska because it's the new Springsteen, and listen to it from that. And then I can certainly remember that we're so excited after 4 or 5 years we're getting new Bruce music and Western Stars, and listen to it with fresh ears and an open heart. You're going to be very happy. Marcos, thank you.
Thank you,
Listeners,
Jesse.
you can reach me at Jesse Jackson DFW on Twitter. The show is on Facebook at Set Lusting Bruce, and I do have a Patreon page if you want, and go to Patreon, look for Set Lusting Bruce, and for as little as $1 a month, you can support the show. Thank you, Marcos. Thank you, listeners. We'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.